So welcome back, everybody, or welcome if you didn't see our small little sip of coffee clip that we did with Dr. David Tranter. Again, my name is Kelly Appleby. I'm the mental health lead for the Thames Valley District School Board, and welcome to Mental Health Week, where our theme for Mental Health Week is #TVDSBstrong. And so I just wanted to take an opportunity to thank Dr. Tranter for being here. Should I call you doctor?
You can call me David.
Can I call you David? Okay. I will call you David then.
Yeah.
So I want to share with people that I was introduced to your book, The Third Path, about a year ago. It was slid across my desk by a colleague, and I'd never heard of it. And the moment I read it, I became a bit of a Tranter groupie. So I am such a huge fan of your work, and I know many administrators in our system are also a huge fan of your work, and super excited to sort of you're here in Thunder Bay, but you're here. So just to kind of carry on with where we started. The third path is about a relationship-based approach to well-being and achievement. And so I'm curious if you can give us a little bit of, in your book, The Third Path, you talk about the conditions that we create in a school that is that sets the stage or that is the soil, the foundation for achievement and learning and success to occur. I'm wondering if you could just talk a little bit about that, and then we're going to sort of focus on with the focus of this context of remote learning. And then a little bit later, we're going to talk about like what happens when we get back into buildings and how the third path is relevant.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe then if I could start, Kelly, but well, first of all, thank you for inviting me on this kind of forum, this show, Coffee with Kelly. It's lovely to see you and talk to you again. And thank you for your kind words about my book. Although, I think what I kind of did was write down what a lot of people I admire do every day. So I think what I managed to do is take what people believe and do and then just put it into words. So it's wonderful when people say that they found it validating and supports kind of their ideas. But I certainly wouldn't claim to come up with anything new, just hopefully maybe a framework and a way of describing it. But maybe if I can, I was thinking about maybe the best way to explain what you've already kind of brought up, this idea of focusing on the conditions, the garden, the soil. I think the best way I've always been able to explain it is tell a little bit of our origin story, because this all started with an observation that I think a lot of educators can relate to. So my colleague who co-authored the book, there's two teachers, Tom Boland and Laurie Carson. They're involved in a project in a school here in Thunder Bay, and it's a very challenging school. It's in one of the most impoverished neighborhoods, not just in Thunder Bay and in Canada. Lots of struggle, kids academically quite far behind, lots of behavioral challenges, a lot of families with a lot of stuff to contend with. They undertook a project. I will spare your kind of viewers all the details about that project, but they worked really hard with a group of teachers for a year or more to kind of transform the school. And the school turned into this amazing place. I mean, it was already pretty amazing. They made it even more amazing. And attendance went up, grades went up, challenging behavior went down. The school really was and is quite a remarkable school. So people started to come and visit it, thinking, well, what's the secret? What's this school doing that's so special? And people would literally go on tours with my friend and colleague Tom, and he would guide the tours, and they would write notes about what they saw. And then they would take it back to their school, and they would try to implement what they saw at Tom's school. So they would see specific things, and they would go and do them at their school. And almost without exception, they would go back, because I followed up with many of these people who who toured Tom's school, they would implement things and it wouldn't work. Not only would it not work, it would fall flat. It just wouldn't work. So they thought that they had accumulated the instructional strategies and the kind of school culture strategies and everything. They go try it. It fell flat.
Wow.
It just didn't work at all. And so I got involved because I thought the school was really neat too. So I started to hang out there. Just, and I'm an academic. I got free time on my hands. I would go and hang out and talk to the educators and talk to the kids and family members as they were dropping and picking up their kids. I ended up interviewing through video every single adult in the building, a whole bunch of kids, a whole bunch of parents, grandparents, even community partners. Long story short, they all said, what's cool about this school? What's special about this school? What's unique about this school? What makes it successful is that we're family. Here we're family.
Mm.
And at the time I thought, well, that's lovely. That's heartwarming. That's what a great school. But I'd be like, that's not very good research. That's not very, detailed. That doesn't give you a list of what to do. Those don't involve strategy. So I kind of left those interviews saying, I don't know what to do next in terms of trying to unpack what this was all about. Anyway, I spent more time at that school. My background, as you know, is in well-being, and I've been really interested in well-being and education for a good long time now, probably about 20 years. It took me a while going through all the research because I tried to park all my assumptions about what my own personal assumptions and my professional assumptions, and what does the research say? Anyway, what the research kept saying again and again and again is that, the strategies that you use, whether they're instructional strategies or behavioral strategies or you name it, are all fine, but they're on at this level. There's a lower level, which is the environment, the context, the school culture, ultimately the relationship. And that if that isn't there, or if you don't apply those strategies up here with a real understanding of the kids and who they are and real connection to them, then the best strategies in the world will fall flat. Dr. Bruce Perry has a great quote that says, people, not programs, change people.
Yes,
and
I've heard that.
So all of this comes back to that kind of observation is when I was sort of fascinated by why didn't Tom's school stuff translate into other schools. It was that what they hadn't taken with them was they hadn't cultivated what Dr. Alison Gopnik, the child development expert, says the garden, the soil in which people grow. And so our book is about the kind of components of that context, of that learning and development context, that garden, that soil, which is all about the relationships that people have in that building.
Yes, and what's really phenomenal that I think that you have really captured, and I hear this from educators who read your book, you've really been able to take these sort of somewhat abstract concepts and really put them into concretely, very concretely, the how to actually create those conditions, that culture, that soil by which everything else then can occur. So I think it's important for people to know that, along with the book are these strategy guides for all 8 conditions that you've written about that are so full of how, because that's, how do I do this? How do I create this culture? And how do I foster these relationships? And that speaks to so many people, I find. Yeah.
That's the challenge that we find ourselves in, and especially in education, as you know, Kelly, and this is sort of your work, I'm sure, every day. Educators are bombarded with initiatives and expectations and theories and research, and what I don't think that the public always fully appreciates is that it's really hard for educators to kind of, through all that noise of expectation, to figure out what are the things that support student success the most. Because there is no way they can do everything they're asked to do every single day. The list just is endless. And so I think what I found like intriguing and a kind of a challenge as a kind of a researcher is to say, well, if I had to boil those things down in terms of, instead of saying there's 100 ingredients in the soil for learning and development, say, well, what's the minimum number of ingredients I could come up with? It would, well, ultimately it was 8. In fact, at one point, I think I probably did have about 50, and then 20. I had 10, and then I was thinking that's too many, and they kept trying to collapse them down, and 8 is as far down as I could go.
Yeah. Well,
but it's trying to name those big ideas, so then educators can hold sort of a handful of ideas in their head, rather than the huge number of sort of expectations and pressures that are put on educators every day.
So the 8 conditions, you know, you outline the first 4 as sort of the foundational 4 of something that we really kind of, that are like really foundational. It's sort of like Maslow's hierarchy in some sense. But, yeah. And so just the first 4: safety, regulation, belonging, and positivity. The first 4 conditions. And I mean, we could talk for days about each one of those things. I mean, we could do an episode for each single condition. So I'm curious then to focus in on this time right now of sort of emergency distance learning. We're not in our buildings. Our relationships with students have changed.
Yes.
And so when we think about the foundational 4: safety, regulation, belonging, positivity, safety being a significant concept right now, can you speak a little bit to what those conditions look like in this particular context for educators and students?
Yeah, this is a kind of sort of fascinating kind of social experiment that we're for all kinds of reasons. So if you think about, so you named the first 4, so thank you, and the 5th one is about engagement in learning. And these are, as you pointed out, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, kind of hierarchical. So in order to be engaged in learning, let's just pick the first one that you mentioned. Safety. Sometimes it's called emotional safety. Sometimes it's called psychological safety. Basically the same thing as far as I'm concerned. So for all of us, not even just young children or teenagers, but even adults, for them to be able to engage in activities, intellectual activities, cognitively engaged, they need to feel emotionally safe. We know that. So one of the reasons why, and again, I think adults and young people alike can sort of test this out for themselves, but I'm hearing all the time right now that people are finding it really hard to concentrate. They're finding it hard to do work. They're finding things that are usually routine challenging to do. And you know, a big reason for that is it's difficult for our brains to engage cognitively when we don't feel when we don't feel emotionally safe, when we're not emotionally regulated, so we don't feel emotionally okay, when we don't feel a sense of connection and belonging, and we don't feel good, we don't feel positive, those first 4. So I think what we're seeing right now is that, you know, we're asking each other and our students to be engaged in learning. But, you know, our kind of worldwide context is that we don't really have those 4 solid requirements in place. And so, of course, you can be engaged in learning, but it takes a lot more energy. It's a lot more depleting to push yourself to be engaged. And people are talking a lot about how depleting it is to do what you and I are doing right now, which is just to talk via video conferencing, and realizing that you have to give a lot to connect with that person, but you don't get as much back, at least not like if you and I were sitting in the same room, Kelly, we would get a vibe going and there would be a connection and we could feed off one another's energy. That relationship would create what we need to be energized to keep going. But when it's through this, I mean, it's way better than nothing, but what's lacking is that that real relationship that feeds you that sort of those critical things like the emotional well-being. And so we're seeing this everywhere. And all my colleagues, all my friends are talking about feeling depleted and feeling slightly grumpier and finding just routine things harder to do because we're not getting those fundamental requirements. Um, um, at least we're sort of giving more often than we're getting back by trying to get through this.
I wonder what you would say um, to educators specifically and administrators specifically now. Certainly we talk about what emotional safety looks like. We've talked about that. I was a social worker in schools for quite some time before I took this position, and these were conversations that we had when we were all in physical buildings.
Yeah.
And our ability to help a child feel emotionally safe, like you just described, face to face, when we can have that sort of resonance, I guess, it is different now. And so I'm wondering, just from that safety standpoint, what would you say? What would you say to educators around really what should be our focus right now when connecting with students?
So there'd be two things that stand out for me right away when you ask that question. One would be to be realistic about what we can ask of students. So no matter what we do, as educators, we can't control what's going on, and so we have to be very, very mindful of the balance of how much we demand of our students and the expectations we place. This is true for parents and for educators, of what our students are really capable of under these conditions. And I think we have to find that balance and cut them a lot of slack. We're already seeing, articles are coming out more and more all the time about some parents are saying to their kids, forget about school this year, and just kind of disengaging. And I probably like you, I get that. I get where that's coming from. That said, I think there's a balance. It doesn't have to be that. But I would say the first and foremost thing is to kind of pull the pressure off of ourselves. So because I think a lot of educators have a high expectations of what they should be trying to pull off, given what's going on, and students are feeling a lot of pressure to do that. The second thing I would say then is to focus on connection. So one of the things I heard, and this is not your school board at all. This was a different school board somewhere else. In fact,
thanks for clarifying that.
I was talking to family members, different school board, and they were saying that teachers did a really amazing job initially checking in with students, but a lot of that just check-in now had kind of disappeared. Just check in for the sake of check-in. So I would say that the more that educators can do just connections. I love these videos of educators who are just reading books to their students or singing songs to their students. Or I was talking to an educator a couple weeks ago who created a little video. Now, granted, her students were young, but created a video about how to build a blanket fort at home so you could have a private place to read.
Brilliant.
So all these really creative, beautiful, lovely ways of connecting with their students in that's kind of developmentally works for them. I think if there's one really critical thing for educators right now is to maintain a connection with not just their students, but the students maintaining a connection with education and with the school.
Yes.
And that learning and all of that stuff's really good too, of course. But without that connection, learning is not going to happen. And so I would want people to invest more time to. I think teachers are doing that, and I think they want to do it, but we have to continue to give them permission to say doing that is really, really important. That's not an extra. That's not a fluffy thing you do on the side. That's critical to maintaining, sort of an important connection, and then later learning will come. That connection.
It sort of seems to me that It's when you use the words like the fluffy thing that we do on the side, maybe at one time, I don't know, but maybe in one time in education, that sort of was the thinking maybe around, well-being as an element of education and relationships and educators sort of seeing themselves as delivering curriculum. Like, my job is to deliver curriculum. And we're sort of in this time where we're shifting that conversation a little bit. And what I think we're sort of in the middle of I teach curriculum, and then over here maybe it's like I've fully integrated this idea that I also that I teach curriculum, and at the same time I'm doing things to support the well-being of kids as well, and we're sort of in between.
Yes.
And interestingly enough, like this conversation at this time in a global pandemic is like there seems to be no better time but to really amplify that and talk about how finely intertwined, because I think people are really getting it. I think people are really getting like, oh, like well-being really matters when it comes to the ability to learn.
Yeah, and I think along the lines of what you're saying too, to support what you're saying, is that I mean, it's kind of what's happening in our society right now is kind of interesting because there's a percentage of adults who are connected to what's happening with COVID-19, where their work lives and lives have increased in pace and stress. So health workers and first responders and people like that, they're out there at an all-time busy. But there's also a significant percentage of people who are at home and who are kind of sort of stepped off the treadmill of life, kind of. And for all of those people who have kind of been forced to step off the treadmill of life, there's an opportunity to really reflect on what matters most. And you and I both know that school is often an extraordinarily busy enterprise. It's just go, 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 go. There's so much curriculum. There's so much going on every day, every week, every month. But what's happening in the world and what's happening in schools is that we've kind of stepped off of that kind of treadmill. And I think we're asking ourselves, well, what really matters the most? And where education is concerned, we don't have the kind of time we used to have to connect with students. So if I have a limited amount of time in terms of access to them, what am I going to do? What are the most important things? So I do think that people are the importance of well-being has really come up strongly, and I think part of it is because we finally have a moment. Again, all of those poor, amazing, hardworking people who are dealing with the actual crisis, they don't have a moment, except that they're of course they are discovering, and we're seeing through them, the toll it's taking on their mental health as well as physical health. For those who's kind of where life is kind of, they push the pause button, they're doing, I think, a lot of reflecting on well-being, and I think it's a really neat time for us to get off that, well, what's usually referred to as a hedonic treadmill, the pursuit of stuff every day, and to say what really matters.
Yes. Wow.
And I think there's a kind of a neat opportunity here to have that conversation and to do a lot of reflection personally about, what matters most. Usually people don't usually do that in their lives until later in their lives. There's this research to suggest that for the average person, they start to think those thoughts in kind of a midlife crisis state, in their late 40s or 50s. But we all have an opportunity to do that now.
Well, and there's a thought to be made around in great adversity. Amongst great adversity can come the most significant learning in some ways.
Because otherwise, you just keep doing what you're doing, and you don't ever have a chance. Often, I mean, I think educators, for them especially, they work like mad throughout the year to kind of keep their head above water. So many of my friends who are teachers say, well, I'm gonna do some reading and reflecting in the summertime, but then summertime is about recovery, and then come September, you're amping up. So for it's not unusual for teachers to go most of their career full time to do deep reflection on the nature of education, the nature of learning, what do students really need, but also personally, what do they need? What's best for their own well-being? How do, you know, so yeah, this is a kind of an opportunity where we've pushed pause to really think about what's most important, and when we get back to school, what's going to be most important.
And that's been on my mind a great deal. I think it's on lots of people's minds as we start to come over the crisis, so to speak, or the hump of the crisis. Is, you know, when things start to open up and when we start to kind of go back out into the world, so to speak, and we whatever occurs and whenever it occurs, that we are back into physical buildings for education. Nobody really knows what that's going to look like. And it's safe to say that there will be lots of things that we need to consider when it comes to the concepts of the third path, when it comes to setting the conditions that are going to allow kids and adults to be able to be present and to learn and to go back to this way of being in terms of achievement. So like it's on my mind, and I'm wondering if we could sort of shift a little bit I'm interested to hear your thoughts about sort of that, whatever that's going to look like, and we don't know, but we know it's going to look different.
Yeah.
And how the sort of conditions in the third path, you know, those foundational four, like how do we intentionally, meaningfully, purposefully focus on those things to set the conditions for kids, rather than just kind of thinking we can jump back in and everybody's going to go right back at it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you say that, I think about a book that I really enjoyed. It's a great book. I think I have it somewhere behind me here. It's a book called Children of Katrina, and it's two researchers who, after Hurricane Katrina, as people will remember, Hurricane Katrina was devastating. It destroyed lots of homes in New Orleans and that area. People were put out of their homes. There were children who didn't go to school for a year at least through Hurricane Katrina. And then they returned to maybe their home if it was rebuilt, or different home, back to school. And these researchers, if I remember correctly, followed a number of young people who had experienced prolonged trauma and prolonged periods of non-school attendance for 10 years, to look at what made the difference in terms of how they fared afterward. And it will probably come as no surprise to you, Kelly, but what among the things they found is that it wasn't so much about the event itself, although the event itself was significant. A lot of it had to do with what happened after the event.
Yes.
So it's easy for us to think, once this is over, as you're saying, it's over and we can go back to business as usual. But we have to remember the lessons of other kinds of significant things like Hurricane Katrina, which is, no, what we do now is vital, but also what we do after it's over is vital, especially for all those kids who are already vulnerable before, and then they're made more vulnerable by this. Now they're doubly vulnerable, and how we support them when they come back is going to make or break, in some respects, their futures. So that would be my first thing, is to not downplay the idea that, well, there's going to be a period of a couple of weeks of adjustment, and then it'll be and off we go. It's going to take a long time for some of these young people to feel safe again, to feel at home in school, to believe in school again. I mean, because there would be all those students who, as it was, they were probably struggling to feel a sense of belonging in their school, given their own sort of personal and family situations. And so, again, I think that's the number one thing, is to recognize how much time and thought and intentionality it's going to take, especially for all those kids who are vulnerable, for them to really be back to school and to be able to thrive at school, So that'd be the first one.
And if we thought about what that might potentially look like, that because in education, it's no secret that our MO is to teach curriculum, to learn, for kids to learn and achieve, and like that's the MO of education. And so what can we start thinking about in terms of knowing that, and that's like educators, man, do they ever do that stuff? That's what they're trained in, that's what they're experts in, that's what they are learning. And so how do we support our educators to also sort of feel competent and confident in really knowing that they can create those conditions, and we will all need to be able to create those, the conditions even more so, to allow them to be able to do what they do in an amazing way, which is help kids learn.
I think that one of the big things that's so vital is that educational leaders, administrators, people in education and teachers, educators of all shapes and sizes give one another permission to slow down and work on things like psychological safety. I think one of the biggest barriers in education is that, again, people feel a lot of pressure to deliver the curriculum and to make progress and to push forward. And I think it's always been my experience that educators want always to do the right thing. But sometimes I think they feel pressure, to push forward, and they need permission to kind of more follow their instincts with their students and say, I just need to slow things down. So I think, first of all, I think we have to explicitly give educators permission to be responsive to their students, to give them the freedom to have messy days in the classroom as they figure out what their students need. Lots of teachers tell me, I always kind of look over my shoulder when my class is kind of chaotic and messy because I'm worried that I'm going to be judged and seen as a poor educator, rather than give them permission to just muddle through this as they reconnect with their students and find out, like, who are they, and and what have they gone through and what do they need. I also think that we have talked a lot about the importance of physical safety right now, and our next phase will be about explicitly talking about emotional or psychological safety and how do we build that. It's a fascinating thing. I don't know if you've had this experience, Kelly, but I've gone into one or two retail places that are still open. The liquor store was one of them. Because
I don't know what you're talking about.
Just only you feel unsafe. I mean, they're doing a fantastic job of maintaining physical distancing, and all of that has nothing to do with the way the store is being run, but you just have this lingering sense of this doesn't feel quite
almost
right.
Hypervigilance.
Yeah, and I think it's an excellent example of what our students will feel, probably times 10 when they return to school. You're right, this kind of hypervigilance, this just sort of lingering sense of this doesn't really feel okay. And it's going to be a long time before that goes away. And as you know, Kelly, it's going to be different for each child. So we can't sort of say, well, again, within a month, everyone should be okay. I think people just have to remember that feeling, that anxiety you have when you even see people collected in a group, and the anxiety that it creates in our bodies and brains. That's this kind of stuff that is going to be with us for a long time. And the younger we are, the longer it's going to be, and the more then teachers have to be given permission to go slowly to build that psychological safety.
And at the same time, I really appreciate you sort of reminding us, though, that there is wisdom in the people that have come before us and who have walked this path. Katrina, Hurricane Katrina, like you say, and you know that wasn't a global event, but it was a significant event for a lot of people. And so there's a great deal of wisdom and learning that comes from that may allow us to just take a breath and just pause and go step by step through this with the kids.
Yeah, I think you're right. There are sort of experiences that have happened before us, and there's a kind of a general kind of wisdom that we know, which is that humans are surprisingly resilient, and that stress isn't in and of itself a bad thing.
Yep.
It's hard for many of our young people, and maybe some of the older ones too, because we've been pretty lucky in North America that we haven't had outbreaks or world wars or things like that just change the face of society. This is for many people the first thing they've ever experienced that just changes the our lives. So that creates a lot of stress, of course, and it creates varying levels of stress. But it's also sort of teaches us that stress, I mean, we've been worried about our kids for a long time, and a lot of parents want to kind of wrap them up and protect them and not have them experience any stress at all. There's also a kind of an interesting lesson in this where we realize we can get through this. Yes. It's kind of like, and I don't want to get too extreme. I don't want to get morbid, but when you get older and you have someone that you know or close to and they die, it's a terrible, terrible thing. But you do kind of learn, hey, I can survive that.
Yes.
And so if there's a kind of other kind of thing in this, it's that, I mean, this is not to say this is not to say that we're all going to be fine. There's going to be a really long period of struggle and grieving. But we can also, I think, see again how resilient kind of human beings are, and many people who thought maybe they couldn't handle it learn to discover that they can.
Yes, and my own personal reflections have been, if the narrative that we may have had about children and youth before this was they're lacking resilience, or that they don't have enough skills to cope. Man, oh man, have I ever been blown away by our students and our kids' ability to brave through this and be courageous, and just absolutely blown away by what I've seen with kids. It's amazing, and I think we have to remember that. We have to really remember that too. Yeah,
that's perfect. It's exactly what I'm getting at, and you're right. I think it's a perfect way to describe it. Is that kind of narrative about kind of worrying so much about our kids and wanting to protect them from the challenges that life places at them. So and then realizing, no, they're doing extraordinary things, and they have surprised, I think, many people in terms of their ability to deal with this in creative and interesting ways. So I think that's the interesting kind of thing, that on the one hand, to recognize the real strength that we see and will continue to see, but also, and again, as you know, not to then say, then we don't have to worry about it.
Yeah.
People are strong, so we don't have to worry about it. You can do both at the same time, again, and I don't want to be overly dramatic, but it is like a death in the sense that a kind of a grief reaction, in the sense that it's real, and people need support, and they'll need support for a long time. But with support, what they'll discover about themselves are sort of resources and strengths and qualities that they might not have fully realized or appreciated they had in them.
And you've brought up that word grief a few times, and it's being written about a lot right now. We're reading a lot in there. And something I read the other day was there's nothing cut and dry about grief and loss, and it is messy. And so I think what we can think about, and you've talked about sort of going forward, is that there's going to be some messiness that we will be navigating, that we have been navigating, that we will be navigating. But we can we can navigate that. We can navigate it if we walk through it together, and we sort of sit in the messiness of it together, and know that that's what's going to happen, and kind of walk through it together. So I'm thinking, it's Mental Health Week, and we have a bunch of stuff going on in our school board for Mental Health Week, and you're sort of a mental health professional, and so am I, and there are people listening who are, and lots of people who are just passionate about mental health. And so our theme this week is #TVDSB Strong, and that concept of sort of strength as it relates to mental health and well-being. And I'm just curious if you have, do you have any thoughts about, reflections even for yourself through this, and what strength has meant for you in your life or your family, or how that relates to students or educate, whatever sort of comes to mind. I'm really wondering if you would comment on the concept of strength as it relates to mental health.
There's so much I could say, Kelly. I'll try to limit it for sure, because we don't have well, for sure, I'll say, as you know, and I'm sure you would agree that, strength is, first of all, one of those kind of tricky words, right? Because it conjures up a lot of cliches and stuff that I've never liked. It's like when people talk about being resilient or things like that, and where we define strength in a very individualistic way, where you're strong if you're emotional independent, you can take care of your own needs and set goals and get your goals accomplished, like all of that kind of stuff. I'm not a fan.
You don't need anything. You take care of your own problems, and
and you
stiff upper lip.
And you don't get too sensitive, and you can just overcome the odds and blah blah blah. And even though that sounds kind of ridiculous when we just put it out there, that's still the kind of prevailing kind of definition of strength. And so I'm not a fan of that one. And especially when we talk about mental health, right? We still link this idea of mental health as someone who's kind of mentally strong and healthy in the same way. I mean, it's probably one of the tricky things around the word health, like physical health. We see a strong body. Mental health, we see a kind of a strong mind. Right. And that's not how mental health works. Because
you're not buying it.
it's because people. I mean, the reason why I got into this work is that people are multi-layered and complex, and I have always, to this day, after 30 odd years, been fascinated by how human beings work. So there's so much I could say, but one of the things that I've been really intrigued by, actually, like thinking more about and encouraging people to do during this period of time, it's a kind of it's kind of the what matters most kind of exercise, but I've stolen it completely from Brene Brown, and that is I like what she has. She in her book Dare to Lead, and on her website too, she has a long list of values, and she sort of says to people, pick two. What are your top two? What are the top two values that you want to live by? Recognizing that you might pick something and a lot of the other values are all packed into that. So you're not negating the other values. These are just sort of higher order values. And for the moment, I think of strength. There's a lot of ways I would define strength, but I think there's a lot of strength in knowing yourself. That old ancient Greek philosopher idea of know thyself, like know who you are, know your struggles and stresses and vulnerabilities, know your abilities and your qualities that make you unique. And I think a great place to start in knowing yourself is thinking about the values, those values that you hold most dear, and how do you not just live by them, but create space in your life to ensure that you live by them. Because I know lots of people who will say, yeah, I love this value. This is my number one. But when I talk to them, well, how do you build that into your life? They say, well, I hope to someday, but I'm just so busy. So I would really encourage people to not pick 10, not pick 5, pick 2 values. Find a list of values, because lots of people probably right now might be listening to this going, what are you talking about? I'll tell you mine. And family isn't one of them. That sounds terrible, right? But family, like, you're supposed to say family right away. But for me, family is in this. But for me, creativity is for me one of the top ones. Knowledge is the other top one. So I know that I'm happy if I can be creative. I know I'm unhappy if I can't be creative. Now that's just mine. All of my friends who I'm very close to, we don't share. We don't have 2 values in common. All of us have wildly. One of my closest friends, her value is collaboration, and I'm like, collaboration. And she's like, no, that's my top value. And I'm like, because actually, creativity and collaboration usually don't go hand in hand very well. Do painters paint a picture collaboratively? No. So I would also say you don't have to share the same values as your dear friends. In fact, that's what's really fun, to have those conversations and say, well, why does this mean that much to you? So that's a long answer, but I think strength is about knowing who you are, which is a lifelong journey. But it's obviously not trying to be someone else. And it's not about knowing all your great attributes. It's knowing the complexity of you. But I think a great way to kind of begin to clarify sort of who you are is this kind of values exercise. I think it actually has a lot more to it than just a kind of a little conversation you might have at a party. It's worth really thinking about, how do I do this? How do I live this every day?
Well, I really appreciate that one of your values is knowledge, because you are a brilliant mind, and not just a brilliant mind, but from the moment that you and I had we had a phone conversation back, I don't even know, in the fall, and then we had this opportunity to meet in March-ish. I don't even know what month it is right now. You have a brilliant mind, and just as importantly, you are one of the most warm, friendly, approachable human beings that truly lives what you write about. You truly live and walk the path of the importance of relationships. You walk it, you embody it, and one of my values is authenticity, and then the other one is integrity, and both of those things could be ascribed to you. So I am so grateful for you. I'm so grateful to know you, and I'm grateful that our Thames Valley system educators and ministers are going to have this opportunity to really get to know you as well. And thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us today.
It's my pleasure. I've likewise. It's been great, just getting to know you and starting to develop a friendship with you and this connection. That's why I was very happy to agree to doing this, because I thought, I'll talk to Kelly anytime.
Thank you. So I'm not sure everybody would say that, so thank you.
I'm still at that.
Okay, let's just stay with that then. Thank you.
So thank you for that. But also, I think this is a great idea, and just to continue. And I know you know this, Kelly, but also kind of mental health and well-being. Well-being is a kind of a conversation, right? It's never something that you accomplish and put your feet up. You're always trying to figure out, what is this? Who am I? How do I want my life to be? It's a conversation. So thank you for what you're doing, because you are, we're getting to have conversations about well-being, and we're getting having conversations in well-being and education, which for me is the best place to have conversations about mental health and well-being, is in education, because that's where all the young people are. So that is where we need to be focusing our energy and attention, where it comes to not just achievement, but mental health and well-being is in education. To me, that like you, that is where I put all my time and energy in when it comes to mental health and well-being, because that's where young people live outside of their homes.
Yeah. We at Thames Valley are we are looking forward to having the opportunity to be able to work more with you and with the third path. So thank you. Be well.
You
Take
too.
care, and we will connect soon.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Kelly.
Thank you.